Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Mate, first things first, let's talk about changing your state. Because total transparency, I came on this morning, I had a long day in London yesterday. I was feeling a little bit flat. I was feeling a little bit low. I was reflecting on some challenging stuff that's going on in my personal life at the minute. And maybe a good framework for this is changing your perspective or changing your sort of position in life. It's the difference between disposition and position. Someone said this to me ages ago and it really, really hit, and it's probably relevant to this morning. It's harder to change your position in things, but it's easier to change your disposition. Do you know what I mean? Where you are in the world is where you are, but it's how you feel about where you are in the world and the things that you're placing your focus on, isn't it? So it's where your focus goes, your energy flows. There's an old Tony Robbins quote that always stands out in my mind. And it's that stoicism, it's that reframing, it's that perspective, it's that how am I looking at what is going on right now? And what can I take away from it? What are the lessons? And again, as I constantly say to people, and I don't give you and Sarah enough credit, but certainly for yourself when we have these types of conversations, you're always a very good aid for me. You help me reframe things. You help me get a bit of perspective. And with respect, a lot of people try and do that, but I often say to people in my internal mind, are you qualified to give me advice? And what I mean by that is, people can just say these things, but sometimes it doesn't matter who the messenger is. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you ever have that. Like, has this person got credibility? Are they talking from a position of experience? Because people can just say aphorisms and words, and we can get into sort of quote porn, can't we? We just have these sayings and things that we say, and okay, what do they mean, and who's the person giving me this advice? But you've really helped me this morning, and I wanted to start us off by acknowledging that, because we just did a little personal recap on how our weeks have been, talked about some personal challenges, talked about some stuff in the past, helped me a lot with some of the stuff I'm going through in the present. So start with acknowledgements and gratitude. I'm very grateful for our friendship, and I want that to be out there.
Nice one, mate. And likewise, no, it's been a good catch up. I've had just about an hour shooting the breeze and talking about all sorts of stuff, covering a bit of ground, some of which is broadcastable, some of which is not.
Not because, just for caveat, not because it's horrific or racist or anything like that, just because some of them are incredibly personal items for myself and Carl.
Personal details, nothing
but
like
we
that.
also spoke about some cool stuff we're going to talk about today. So we've had some really good guests recently. Let's start there. We're both reflecting on, who do you want to start with?
So do you know what? I really enjoyed the podcast this month, and there was Ian Greenham, who I know Ian very well. He's a great guy, and really came across well on UCRO. And the
have you been to UCRO before?
Yeah, it's a great event, and if you ever want to showcase specialist skills in the rescue services, not just fire and rescue, it's brilliant. Emily Watkins was a really engaging podcast. I know we were chatting earlier about our time as fire behaviour trainers and just the impact on your body potentially that we probably don't even know about. FBT in its it's still relatively young in the history of firefighting, and those of us that have spent.
Well, so you go back further than me. Like, you were talking about some of your reflections on amount of times you'd worn in the day, going home and sort of sitting with your partner and just feeling like you need to recoup, trying to hydrate enough, feeling that mental fog and that pounding headaches as well that we get sometimes. And how much of it do we attribute to that's just the way things are? And then also, perhaps to build on that, we were talking about future states and if this is always going to be the way things will always be, which is obviously very unlikely.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Renowned for innovation, quality and reliability, Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show.
Do you know, I think there's just the awareness now on firefighter health, things like the links to cancer, the physiological and psychological effects of being exposed to chronic heat. I think intuitively we just know that it's probably not good for us long term. And I know in a fire and rescue service I worked in, quite forward thinking in this area, and commissioned a study for us fire behaviour training instructors who were breathing apparatus instructors as well. So we did both, but we predominantly spent, some weeks we could deliver 2 courses, sometimes 3. If you overlapped a weekend, you'd pick up, and I think it was really interesting when we started to look at some of the stuff around what we were burning in the units. Back in the day, it was chipboard. Moved on to the OSB board, which had less formaldehyde in it, which I think most fire and rescue services use now. But
there's an internal challenge within that, because it's something that Matt Adams spoke about when I was having a conversation with him at the National BA Challenge, which will come out in a couple of weeks as well. And it's the balance between trying to create realistic fire situations where the smoke and the rate of combustion and the accurate fire loading, and also, fire bricks don't behave the same way that a plasterboard living room would, with wallpaper and ceilings and soft furnishings and all that sort of jazz. So the irony is, the more realistic you make it, the better the training will be, but the more physical cost and long-term health costs you'll have to pay for the realism of the training. Yeah,
because we can't make the incident ground any safer. We're going to make the training as realistic as possible. And I think, again, FBT, fire behaviour training, was had the benefit of going over to Sweden and spending a couple of weeks in Sweden in 2000 doing some fairly pioneering stuff at the time. And the Swedes were way ahead of us, particularly with carbonaceous burns back then, and a wonderful range of facilities and opportunities. And actually at the point where they do burn houses, so they go out there, they will find a house that's, derelict in the middle of nowhere, and they'll actually set fire to it and sit you in a room and you can watch that fire develop. And I think, when we sort of bring that back to the containers that we have now, and there's been much discussion around, containers, different containers and the configuration of those containers, and absolutely invaluable for teaching firefighters a principle of gas cooling, progressing into a compartment. But also as well, I've also observed that I think it's not everything, is it? You've got to tie that up with safe, movement through smoke and darkness, recognising when conditions aren't ideal and you need to get out, and that gas cooling will not keep you safe. Boundary cooling necessarily will not keep you safe. And I think when you look at some of the way that other fire and rescue services approach, particularly over in the US, their approach of tactical ventilation is completely different to ours, as an example. And I do wonder if there's a time, particularly when you start looking at the contaminants agenda and the issues around that, when you start looking at the physiological impacts of putting people into compartment fires at 800, 1,000 degrees, and that over a 40-year career, which is predominantly what our firefighters are going to could possibly well do now. There might be a time in the UK Fire and Rescue Service in the next 50 years when we look back on entering a compartment fire almost as antiquated as using a hook ladder, because of the exposure to contaminants. If you think about PPV, positive pressure ventilation, when that came out, in the early 90s, it was a great tool and still remains a great tool for tactical firefighting. But do we use it for its originally intended purpose? A lot of services use it post-fire ventilation. When you look at the way it was brought out, it was originally designed to clear the fire compartment sequentially or whatever, and you would not be working in that level of contaminants. Very forward thinking. And there's been an awful lot of research and a lot of ground covered since then, but the basic principle remains the same, that if you can make the compartment clear and you can bring the temperature down, you're not operating in those, and I know it's not ideal for every fire and every situation. There are many challenges with PPV. But I do wonder if we sort of look forward and if we were sort of looking back at the fire and rescue service in 30, 40, 50 years' time, is going into a compartment fire, almost like we would look at the smoke gobblers, as we call them, the firefighters that, I can still remember a time in service when we didn't wear breathing apparatus at car fires, as an example.
Yeah.
And now look at what we do. We would not dream of approaching a car fire and dealing with that. So I just wonder where it's going to go. But this is all progress, and this is all about the longer term health, well-being, fitness of firefighters. And I can just see in the sector now, I think there's a lot of momentum building around this. And I thought Emily's podcast was brilliant around the physiological side, and that the body's inflammatory response to that, and chronic exposure, not just your one hit wonder, one compartment fire every 3-6 months. This was about the breathing apparatus instructors, BAIs, and the CFBTIs that are doing it day in, day out.
Do you know what I think is some of the low-hanging fruit? And that's something I always love. When I think about what's deployable, it's useful. And there's an enormous WhatsApp group that there's about 600 messages in there every couple of flipping days. Incredible fire behaviour experts from around the UK. And this is where the Tactical Firefighting UK group that's come from, that we've put a couple of episodes about is speed. Speed of attack. Because I think that is an easier thing to move forward with. That doesn't mean we have to drop off and neglect all the other stuff, and it takes us away solely from the conversations around coning and specific branch technique methods and PPA versus PPV versus transitional and external, all this sort of stuff. Just speed of attack. I think it's a common usage in business, certainly in sport, and I know we shouldn't always make these comparisons. They're not always fair comparisons, but speed kills. Speed kills in business. First to market. Be first to market. Yeah. If we are just so much quicker at the job that we do, I always think about when I talk about radiation, people say, time distance shielding. Right. Think about exactly the same when you're going into a fire. Time distance shielding. Stop spending ages in there. Get in there. Do you know what I mean? You get direct to the fire, use protection, use walls, use doors, stay out of flow paths, make as quick an attack on that fire as you possibly can, and then get out of there. Ventilate it and get out of there. I think we just spend so much time in there, and you run this through a risk analysis. People go, but I'm part of a group that's trying to get rid of the BA shuffle nationally. Because you look at it as a risk analysis, and you go, well, it's in case people fall through floorboards. Okay. And again, it's because we don't share data and all that sort of stuff in the ways that perhaps we could do. How many people are falling through floors? Not very many. Has it happened? Yeah, it's happened. Has it resulted in the death of a UK firefighter? Yes, it has. Very, very infrequent, very, very rare. Buildings are much better than they ever used to be. All of that sort of jazz. Will it never happen again? No, I'm not saying that. But the cost to benefit reward of how slow we're going with our BA shuffles is a singular example.
Yeah.
Just get rid of it. Get rid of it.
Yeah. So then it's that thing about
not getting rid of it. It's just going, is it relevant now? Because if you looked at car fires again, like how many cars spontaneously accelerate off the spot and injure a firefighter? It's happened. Yeah, certainly happening with EVs and stuff like that. Does it mean it's going to likely to happen at every single one, and we're going to spend 20 minutes ensuring the whole thing is isolated and chocked to the nines and cribbed so it doesn't move? No, we don't do that, because it rarely ever happens. It might happen, and we'll put some chocks in some temporary provisions for that. But again, going down a rabbit hole. But Emily's, I thought, was a fantastic episode. Emily's great, and we've got another one coming out very, very soon. Let me just pull up the lady's name so that I don't disrespectfully forget who the lady was. Hers will go out after this. Rowena Hill.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Rowena Hill! What a fantastic lady, and she runs ASA. Do you know what ASA is? I've
seen Rowena speak. I don't know what ASA is, no.
Yeah, ASA. She's the chair of ASA, which is the academic sharing platform. She's trying to bring together all the academics. So Nikki Power is on there, Emily Watkins is on there, Anna Steck is on there. It's this board of academics who are trying to help UK firefighting, and they're closely connected with the NFCC and other organisations to try and help pool all this information. Because when I was at the National BA Challenge, Anna Steck was talking about how we don't record stuff in the same way. So when it comes to trying to create academic literature for some of this stuff, it's almost nigh on impossible, because the first question will be, have you got comparative data? And then you say no, and you go, well, that's the end of it then. We can't proceed, because you haven't got a pool of comparative data that we can legitimately do an academic study on. So we need to get ourselves together. We need to start.
Yeah, and do you know what this? We've talked about this before. Just around the proposal in the fire reform around the College of Fire, and we talked about this last time around. And again, part of that sort of proposal is to have that central research and development.
Roy Wilshire talks about it again in his episode that people will hear soon, or they'll have heard by the time this comes out.
Yeah, and I think
who's going to pay for it?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, and Emily sort of touches on this in the podcast, and she sort of talks about, one of the challenges is getting access to sufficient numbers of people to do this. It takes time, it takes money, and generally speaking, we all know that potentially there may well be a longer term problem that will need some investment to solve it. Yeah. And that's not an excuse for not doing it, but it is a challenge. And
the College of Policing, they've got the College of Paramedics, they've got, these exist. Yeah. In other organisations, but I don't know who's going to put their hand in the pocket. I just want to circle back for a second before we skip past it. Inflammatory markers, carcinogens, SNOMED codes. It came up again in Emily's discussion, and obviously John Lord and Robbie Burns spoke about it when we were at the Emergency Services show. SNOMED codes, folks. Look at the union's information on that. Go and speak to your local GP. SNOMED code. If you don't know what that is, look back, find John Lord's episode. And Steve Robbie Burns, please ensure that you look at that. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Jumping forward or back into the future of firefighting, and will we still be going into buildings doing what we're doing? I was seeing Justin Johnson, who is the exiting chief of Lancashire. Lovely bloke. Some people might hate him, but I like him. Met him quite a few times. Do you ever meet Justin?
Yeah, I remember I worked with Justin through the NFCC for many years on the on-call project and Firefit. And I know Justin's been a real advocate for Firefit and has made some real progress over the years with that. And
they
also
do some
very
innovative stuff in general.
And a really great bloke as well. Yeah. So he's a really nice fella. So
they do some innovative stuff with firefighting in general. I think Lancashire's always been a little bit at the tip of the sword in that. And I saw they did a post recently saying that they've invested in this, how they term it. I've actually pulled it up. It's a Rosenbauer product, the RTE robot. So this is a firefighting robot. So multifunctional robot. The RTE robot, which stands for Rosenbauer Technical Equipment, is a robot specifically developed for fire departments and blue light organizations. The multifunctional tracked vehicle is the answer to many emerging changes and new requirements in the fire department. A unique interchangeable superstructure system makes this diversity possible. With so-called payload modules, it's possible to react quickly to a wide range of operational requirements. This means that everything is possible from extinguishing to support for heavy logistic tasks to rescue work. The robot payload are controlled simply and intuitively via radio remote control. So this thing does 3,800 litres a minute, and it will drag 2 fully charged, I think 70 mil soft suction, but it can also carry a whole LPP and 4 hard suction. It's a tracked vehicle. What I mean like that is it's got tracks on it like a tank, and pretty impressive bit of kit. And again, we just echoes back on that. Will we see sometime in the future you just send this thing into a building? I have no idea. I'm assuming they probably claim that it can do that now. Obviously, it's going to struggle to get up and down stairs, but it's certainly an option. It's obviously an option that Lancashire and I'm sure other people are exploring. Some people will hate the idea of it. You can never replace the intuitive firefighter and you can't replace experience and all that sort of stuff. But at some point, you do have to include it in the risk benefit analysis, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, having worked with the EOD, explosive ordnance disposal,
they've been using these.
They've been using the wheelbarrows, they call it, for years, and what it does, it kind of takes away that. So if you think about a job where you've got hazardous materials, you've got cylinders, you know, if you need to get some water on something, you know, and it's too dangerous or deemed too dangerous to send firefighters in, then, you know, first thing is you eliminate that risk, don't you? And you try and eliminate the hazard, and you send it in.
Send that in to deluge that cylinder for 25 minutes or whatever we need to do, you know, because you can't get anyone within this 200-meter cordon of this propane cylinder that's been involved in fire or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and you can, you know, in terms of risk management, you know, that is something. However, it's never going to be like you say, you know, you're never going to replace that a firefighter needing to enter the building to, you know, if you enter a multi-compartment building and there's a chance that people are in there and you need to go and find them, that is always going to be. But it comes back to the BA shuffle. I don't think we'll ever get away from it. I think we'll always end up. It's like pump operation. You know, look at the pumps. You know, you go to the back of a pump now, they're like a spaceship. You know, you look at it. But you know, I learned to operate a pump on a board and tube gauge and a compact. You know, and learn low and high pressure. You know, it's that thing about, will we ever get away from the need to, when all of the technology fails, when it can't ever do what it needs to do. Technology will get you so far, but at some point you'll need to go back to that whole thing about entering a building, doing the BA shuffle. I don't think we'll ever see a time when we don't teach firefighters how to, certainly not in my lifetime. And here I am on record saying that, not do the BA shuffle and need to go and search a smoke-filled compartment. I'm going to put it out there, Pete.
I think it will stay there as a tool in the toolbox. But similar to guidelines and other things, I'd like to see it slowly become extinct. Talking about drones and stuff, I've not shared this with you yet because it's an email I need to get back to, and therefore I won't say what company it is because we might do an episode with them in the future. But it's something around the Fire Spider. Have you heard of this one?
No.
So, you know, you've seen some organisations where there's a drone that you can connect to a hose reel and it goes up and fights a high-rise fire and all that sort of stuff. Well, this one is another option on that. Obviously less influenced by the weather and also less influenced by the fact that it can't really hold a great deal of weight. So this thing arrives on the back of a lorry, and if you agree to it, you'd get these anchor points fitted to your high-rise buildings. So top left, top right as an example. And you get two little drones. They fly up, connect these little strings effectively to these anchor points. Those strings are attached to the rigging that's below it, and it immediately drags up a large firefighting mechanism, basically, where it can project a branch. And you move it round, you know, a bit like a vending machine works. Yeah. So it's got anchor points, two at the bottom, anchor points, top left, top right. And then you move this thing around the building and it can go as close as you like to the exact compartment that you want it to do external firefighting from. And it can go up some ungodly number of floors. I'm assuming the entirety of the high-rise is probably what the company that I was speaking with. I think they're going to come on and do an episode. I need to follow up with them. But again, it's an option because we look at Alps and TLs and all this sort of stuff. They still have a tremendous limitation. You know, we buy them half for rescue, predominantly as an external firefighting media. They're not going to be the answer to a lot of the challenges that we face with high-rise fires, but this company's trying to get in there. But again, an interesting topic and something that people may hear us talk about.
Look forward to that
in the future. This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA connected firefighter platform. Now back to the show. we were talking a little bit about. Well, I had a topic I wanted to talk about with regard to why people join the fire and rescue service and if it's a job for life. And you had some really interesting, insightful things. You obviously do a lot of leadership development, coaching and mentoring, something that showed itself in our first episode way back when, and something you informally helped me with on a variety of places. And you're also doing a little bit of coaching and mentoring with me recently around job applications and personal professional challenges. So where do we want to go first?
Well, I think the first question, it's a really fundamental question, is the attraction to the job. Why do people join the fire and rescue service, and do people still join the fire and rescue service because they see it as a job that they'll have for life, or is it more something where, as generation of people come through, are people seeing it more as a something they'll do for 7, 8, 10 years and sort of move through? And I think we're going to see, whereas, certainly when we joined, there was a defined period where, linked to the pension, and we know there's been some changes to the pension. Are people still seeing it as a job for life? What attracts people to join the fire and rescue service? And it's an interesting kind of question, isn't it? Because I know it's certainly my time over the last sort of 31 years, I've seen generation of firefighter coming through. But society also changes as well. Society has changed a lot in the last 30 years, and firefighting, is better paid now than it ever was, and rightly so. And it's all of those.
Is it by comparison?
I think so. I was having this conversation with my son last night, who's just started an apprenticeship, and we were chatting about his apprenticeship wage, and I said, son, that's a reasonable wage. He said, Dan, what were you earning back in 1992? So I sort of explained that my first take-home pay as a firefighter, trainee firefighter, was £650. And so I put it in the inflation calculator thing, and we were having this debate because I was sort of obviously clearly trying to tell him that I'd had it a lot worse than he had, obviously, because that's what you do as a dad.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I was earning £200 more than he is pro rata now, and I think so that's over sort of 30, 31, 32 years. So, but in real terms, we know
is it still a blue collar job?
It's always going to be a practical, at times a really dirty, dangerous, difficult job, isn't it? There's no two ways about that as a firefighter, and I think
only up until a certain rank, though. I would agree. I would not agree, but I would propose.
Say that again.
I was going to say only up until a certain rank, which I think is why the direct entry stuff helps acknowledge maybe the blue collars from the white collars, and it probably shows that in the way that we dress. Because I think there's people that have skill sets that then go on to operate at levels that you operated in your operational or formal career. Because it is a very different skill sets. And I think, I'm not sure if I could make it through. We'll talk a little bit in a minute around where I'm at with my own development and pursuits. But I don't know if I have the skill set, the political appetite, the whatever set of characteristics. There's two options. A, would lend me to be useful at that level, or B, would even make it fulfilling for me.
I think one of the great things that I will always love about the fire and rescue service is that you can join as a firefighter and you can finish as a chief if you so want to do and are prepared to apply yourself. But it's in some ways, we're looking at businesses that I do some work with on a consultancy basis. The good people generally get promoted, or the technically really good people will get promoted, but that doesn't necessarily make them good leaders. And I don't think that's particular to any one sector. I think there's people's desire to progress through any organisation will be driven by certain things. I think the fire and rescue service is no different to any other organisation or sector, in that people's drive to progress will be for different reasons. Some people may do it for financial reasons, for personal fulfillment reasons, but I think it's about finding a level that you're comfortable with, and there's always going to be some imposter syndrome in there around, and I certainly felt it in my career. You know, you get to a certain level and you think, oh, can I do it, the next one, and then you get comfortable in that, and then you move to the next one. But it's about getting the right people, isn't it? It's about and making sure that the development is right for those people, the culture's right as well. I know the Fire and Rescue Service has had a lot of focus and probably continues to get a lot of focus for its culture. And, you know, it is one of those things, and one of the biggest complaints I used to get in service was around, in all the services I worked in, was around promotion processes and people sort of viewing the promotion process as either, if you get promoted, it's brilliant. If you don't, it's rubbish. And then there's people on the sidelines that have a view on it, and people that get promoted and all sorts of. But that's no different to any other organisation. I think having gone through lots and lots of iterations of trying different processes to identify people for development, early access gateways, you know, selection and development, I still think show me a perfect system. You know, everybody kind of does it slightly differently. It used to be quite uniform back in the day, and again, that had its downfalls as well. But show me, and when we went from rank to role, that was an interesting kind of thing.
I want us to go back in a minute, but I want us to keep on where we're at. So I want us to go back in a minute. Remind me in a minute, because I wrote out 10 things where I think people join the Fire and Rescue Service. But we'll go back to that in a minute. For now, tell me what I am doing wrong. So we both know I've been through 30 plus, and we're going to exclude any specifics that will indicate, obviously, organisations that I work with or for. But in my professional capacity, I've done over 35 promotional processes in the last 3 years with very little success. Well, I've got 4 jobs out of the 35. We've discussed a lot of this. And some of the, and again, you're not going to pretend to be able to answer all this perfectly right now and blah, blah, blah. We've had many, many conversations about this, but I want to try and bring it in and also just be transparent and vulnerable and open for the audience. What am I doing wrong?
So I'm going to put my coach's head on now, Pete, and I'm going to say, what do you think you're doing wrong? Well, one of the questions that I did ask you was, what feedback have you had in terms of, are there any common themes that you have picked up on? Is there anything that's coming through on terms of a common theme? It would probably be the first thing to reflect on. And then I suppose the next part to that was, what does that mean to you? Do you recognise any of it? Because the other thing is, we all have blind spots as well. And sometimes we don't want to look at those blind spots, and sometimes we don't recognise those blind spots. And going back to our conversation, the question I asked you really was, what was your feedback? Are there any consistent themes? You know, what's your top 3 kind of things? And you may or may not want to share them on here, but no. I think it's often good to get the feedback, either successful or not successful, because there may be some things in there that you need to pay attention to. You know, I've certainly been successful in and unsuccessful in promotion processes at every level. And, you know, the feedback that I've had when I've been unsuccessful is as valuable as when you have been successful. So I suppose the unsuccessful is the bit that we're sort of looking at now. And I just wonder, you know, for me, I'd like to know, what's your reflections on the feedback that you've had?
So first, you asked me around what motivates me to apply for the next level. So I'm a watch commander, sub-officer in the UK Fire and Rescue Service at the minute. And you asked, why do you want it? So I spoke about wanting to influence change, personal development courses, developing others and changing it for the better, which all sound like I'm trying to be Miss World. And the final one was, I said, I'm bored. You know, I said, I'm very bored with what I'm doing. Feedback that I'd been given: brevity. Don't say things in 7 ways when 1 will do. You know, don't use 50 words when 10 will do. Pitching above the level I'm going for. So obviously I'm applying for a station officer, rider station officer, station manager type roles around the UK Fire and Rescue Service. And probably because of the podcast at times, I can get into conversations at a national and international level and start talking about academic research and start talking about other things beyond the level that I'm going for. Staying on point and being accurate was a a point, because obviously the podcast, the beauty of this is we go in lots of different directions, and I've kind of picked up some bad habits. I've not picked up bad habits. I've picked up habits that don't lend themselves to the way that we like to do interviews, or the way that I've experienced interviews with the organisation that I work for. And again, there'll be many different ways and many different services and brigades that do them differently. But the way that the organisation I work for wants to hear them is not the way in which I'm obviously delivering them.
Yeah. So there's a lot in there, isn't there? And first things first, you are who you are, and you can't change that at all. But what you can do, certainly when you're in the interview and selection process, is represent yourself in a way that complements the process, and that, I think there's a lot to be alert. A lot of feedback I can give people after interviews sometimes is about being alert to the needs of the panel.
Yeah.
And a well-structured, concise answer at the right level is a gift to anybody who's sat behind the table. And again, the definition, we've talked about this before, of any sort of promotion interview or recruitment interview, is that two people sat on opposite sides of the table, desperately not hoping that neither party finds each other out.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in that, just remembering that if you can gift wrap it to the interviewer in a succinct way at the right level. And again, we've talked about this, Pete, and you've just mentioned it around, you do get exposed to an awful lot of broad, national, international, strategic stuff. But again, coming back to the reflections on that would be around, is that something that will necessarily help you in that role that you are pitching yourself for? And if we use your journey from becoming a supervisory to a middle manager, it's a significant jump, and it's probably for many people, and I include myself in this, moving from that supervisory to middle manager it still is for me probably one of the most defining moments of my fire service career. So we shouldn't underestimate what you're doing. And to anybody, I would always say, remember to pitch yourself at the level at which you are going for. So if you go and tell the interview panel how good a watch manager you are, I'm pretty certain they will know that anyway, which is one of the reasons why you sat in front of them in the first place. The bit you've kind of got to tell them is how great a station manager you are and how potentially good you would be for a group manager level, because don't forget, succession planning is something that every interview panel will be considering, particularly given the turnover of staff in the most fire and rescue services will be thinking about that. So, bring it back to yourself, Pete, that thing around structuring your answer, and some people use the STAR model. Some people think that, and that's good to a level. I think that's good to a point, and some people work well with that, but it doesn't suit everybody. And some people, one of the models I will sometimes use, particularly as people get into the more senior and executive level, is around statement, evidence, impact. So if you get asked a question, you'll make a statement on that's relevant to the question. You'll provide some evidence of that, but then the bit that many people forget is the impact of that and the results, and what does that mean? And for an aspiring middle manager, the impact, the level of question answer that you want to be given should be at the organisational kind of impact level. And again, we've kind of discussed this, but there's various models out there for structuring your interview answers, and that's kind of a preference for me. And particularly when I'm working with people who are pitching themselves into that sort of middle into strategic roles, the statement, evidence, impact model is very often better than the STAR model. How do you feel about your interview answers? Do you think that's fair feedback, Pete?
No, I do, unfortunately. I think I constantly either cutting my nose off to spite my face, or I feel half the time like I'm just losing enthusiasm for it. But then if I stop trying to make the difference, then, or if I stop trying to make, but then also I do ask myself if the biggest impact I'm going to have is this thing. But also I think that's quite sad if that is true. That's not sad. I mean, this is a cool thing that we're doing. It's a very, very cool thing. It's something I'm incredibly proud of. But I also secretly always feel a bit sad that it sits external from my professional role.
I think there's something in that, Pete, and maybe it needs to. Given
It does
that.
need to, because it can't exist any other way. I don't think we've discussed this at length before, but it's almost like you can't ever use it. Like I don't use the podcast really in any interview examples or analogies or evidence, because it depends who you get on the day. Someone could easily sit there and go, how does that help us as an organization? Doesn't, Pete. So great for you personally. What have you done to help so and so station or to help this incentive within our organization?
Yeah, and I guess that depends on the question, doesn't it? And the interviewer's perception of that, and maybe a question around your own self-development. If you were ever to get a question around self-development, could well, if you were to use this as an example, I think that'd be a very relevant example in terms of your exposure to broad topics, understanding, exploring, etc. But of course, there is always something about that when you're going for those middle manager roles, you do have to be quite focused in on your organisation and the sector, I suppose, as a whole. And if you were to find a way to be able to let's use the podcast as an example. And I also, from experience of interviewing many people for different levels, I also welcome personally, and I know other fellow interview panel members have welcomed broader range of examples. Not necessarily from within the fire and rescue sector. Some of the best interviews I've ever had have been from recruit firefighters who have come from a diverse background and have had a particular experience at something, and I've been sat grip wanting to talk to them all day. And I think we can take that through, and I think if we think about the introduction of the IPDS, the rank to role, and there was intended to be a recognition that we are the sum of our parts, and that what makes us a good leader,
I don't think we're there yet.
Different, and I think it varies from service to service. And
I think a big step in that direction was the direct entry stuff. Yeah. Obviously, that was a formal recognition that we believe you can have the right character traits, the right professional qualities, irrespective of where you have developed them.
Yeah.
That you can be a very valuable member of our organisation, but we don't seem to lift our sort of mental lens and narrow focus to be able to include those things for people that already exist within our organisation. And again, my own very, very small and closed experiences.
Yeah. Direct entry, and again, we've talked about this many times. That brings in a different perspective, doesn't it? That brings in a different viewpoint, and leadership from another sector, bringing that into the fire and rescue sector has been definitely got some advantages. Likewise as well, spending time, anybody who spends any time in the fire and rescue service will have a number of transferable skills that they can use outside of the fire and rescue service that are very, very valuable to external employees as well, and particularly as you get through into leadership roles, that pretty much what you do on a day-to-day basis, you have to operate in a way that I'm going to use the word business-like, but you have to be aware of that everything has a cost. There are governance arrangements to work within. So I think it's about that broad view is not necessarily a bad thing at all. I think it's just how we frame that. But it's really difficult in the interview and selection process scenario, isn't it? Because any interview, any selection process assessment, there is always a bit of theatre involved in it, because you are wanting to go and represent the best version of yourself, and there's a lot to that, but it also brings a lot of pressure, and it's not always an environment where people will always shine. And I can think of many people that I've worked with in the past that have maybe got to a certain level and wanted to aspire, and have got all the skills and the attributes that they would need to be a fantastic leader, but just can't seem to get that across in an interview or in a selection process. And there's lots and lots to that you could unpack around. Is the interview processes that we use, or are the interview processes that we use, that they bring the best out in people? There are so many different variations across the country that people use. But ultimately, each fire and rescue service has to do what they believe is right for themselves to serve their needs and to get the best out of people.
The team here at the podcast are extremely excited to announce our brand new partnership with Patrol Store UK. Patrol Store has been serving the UK's police, fire and emergency communities and first responder sector since 2008, providing leading brands such as Hikes, Magnum, 511, Nebo, Op Zulu, Highlander, AKU and many, many more of our favourites. They are now also supplying bespoke uniform, PPE and station workwear to fire services around the UK. So for all our listeners that are part of your USAR, your HEART team, your ISAR team, your armed response teams, your fire investigation, your NALO, your hazmat and all of the training departments that have got your own budgets, be sure to get the absolute best for your team at a realistic price by contacting Aaron and the team at Patrol Store and referencing the Firefighters Podcast. Patrol Store will also be taking part in our listener competition giveaways as well as providing unique discounts to podcast listeners. So for people that are always asking about Hikes boots as an example, that is one unique discount code that is coming to you very soon through Patrol Store. We've also got some incredible bags. I mean, the Op Zulu bags are a game changer. So you know the really Gucci and expensive tactical black bags that everyone's using in CrossFit workouts and taking to the gym and taking to stations? Well, they've basically got that, but it's made better and costs less, because they're not slapping some Gucci expensive brand name on it and it's giving you what you want on a first responder salary. Be sure to keep your eyes in the notes of the episodes for links to unique offers and discount codes. And if you're looking to buy well and buy once, be sure to get in the notes and head over to Patrol Store UK. Now back to the show.
But, being succinct, I would say is something that we could all work on, And,
oh, God damn, I need to work on it, man. Jesus Christ. But I disdain it because I'm like, I get it for the thing that you need to do. It needs to operate in that template because it needs to be short and brief and we've got to get these 6 questions done in an hour. But I just think it's such a narrow lens that we try and box people into. That's why it just rubs me and I just need to get over myself.
Yeah, and it's not unique to the fire and rescue service. Every sector, I've been through a few interviews over the last sort of 12, 18 months. And people have to get information out of you within a time-bound kind of time. And, I don't think it's particular to the fire and rescue service. I think the trick is just developing yourself as best you can to try and parcel that up in a way that's alert to the needs of the panel and answers the question as well. You'd be amazed at how many times I'll say to people in feedback, I really tried with that one, but I couldn't actually get you to answer the question. And it's almost as if people will bring in a pre-prepared kind of for what they think is. So if
no matter what you say, I'm going to say this.
You're having this. And you're having it, and sometimes you just have to have it, and you just have to let people. But again, there's a lot to interviews, a lot to promotion, and I'm sure people will find it quite valuable listening to your experience as well, Pete, and keep you posted.
It gives us a nice segue into some of the leadership elements that you'd noted down that we were discussing before this. Probably a good time to go into them.
Saw a really great article on LinkedIn. It was a couple of months ago, and I follow the Diary of a Leader, Sonia McDonald, who's the CEO and founder, Leadership HQ. They bring out some really great articles on a weekly basis. And, me and leadership, love it. And I read this, and it sort of sat with me, and I kept it in my inbox and thought, you know what, it was called The Hidden Rules of Leadership. And it sort of, when I looked at these sort of hidden rules of leadership, I thought, God, this is all the stuff that you can't really contain it in a book. You can't really teach it on a leadership or a management course. And there's sort of 10 points. I wanted to whiz through them and just maybe discuss them. And the first kind of one, the hidden rule, is listen more than you speak, Pete. Mm-hmm.
2 ears, 1 mouth.
Yeah.
Listen twice as much as you speak. They often say that the fools speak just to say something, but wise men speak when they've got something to say. And I heard a great one where, there was a guy that used to chair leadership meetings in the organisation that I work for, and he would always speak very quietly. And it went against the element of like being bold and having an impact on a room and all that sort of stuff. We think we have to be loud and proud and all this sort of stuff. But he used to say, when I'd start speaking, if I was speaking quietly, what you realise that naturally happens is everyone gets a little bit quieter so that they can hear what you're saying rather than just trying to talk over each other.
Yeah. And I think listening is great for connection as well. If you want to connect with people, listen and pay attention to what they're saying, and quite be curious and listen, and building connection with people. I think as a leaders are really important. Authority is one thing, and you will naturally carry authority. And again, I think the Fire and Rescue Service, we have a kind of an assigned leadership structure where people will carry a degree of authority. Again, no different to any other organisation. But I think that the best leaders, and I sort of recognise that listen more than you speak. And we all.
Well, the idea, are you hearing and speaking, or are you listening to understand and listening to respond, or are you just waiting for your turn to speak? Podcasting is always a great example of this, and it's why I make notes against what the people are saying. Not because I'm trying to force myself to be more and more present within the conversation, so that I'm not just yeah, that's interesting, Carl. Here's something I want to talk about. You're like, well, you weren't even listening to what Carl just said. You were just waiting for your turn to speak.
And many of us, and I think we'll all recognise this, find ourselves in conversations where we're not actually focusing on what the person's saying. We're just thinking about what we're going to say next and how we're going to respond.
My turn to broadcast. Ready?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a skill, and it's one to practice, isn't it? So listen more than you speak. The next one was show, don't tell, and this was about leading by example. And how many leaders have we worked with where we can sort of, I hear what you say, but I see what you do. And setting the tone in any organisation is about people will pay more attention to what you do than what you actually say.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like when we say about kids, they don't learn, they absorb. And that's what I try and do with my daughter all the time. The podcast, the fitness stuff, the personal challenges, the vulnerability, just talking about stuff today. I said I went to London yesterday with my daughter and her friend, and I encouraged her, and she went to Pineapple Dance Studio. She's 12 years of age, and she goes to a local dance club here. And she went down to Pineapple. I'll make it a short story. And basically, her and her friend, I paid for them to have a spontaneous drop-in class with a group of, I think they were like 17 to 23-year-olds who were doing this contemporary dance. Scary as hell. Put your mind in that of a 12-year-old. Second time she's ever been to London. She was very young to see a show. Now she's going at 12 years of age to Pineapple Dance Studios. It started in 1979. It's a massive global brand. Scary as hell. But that's why I always talk to her about the scary things that I do, the things that worry me, the things that upset me, things that I'm scared about doing, feel embarrassed about, going for promotions that I don't get, going to Firefighter Challenge events and not winning. The hypocrisy of asking people to do things that you're not willing to do yourself. And it comes back to that authenticity of show, don't tell, isn't it?
Massively so. And I think there's nothing that would erode a leader's credibility than saying one thing and doing another. And I think that demonstrating, again, it builds a connection as well, and spending time showing people how to do certain things, how to be a good leader, how to deal with certain things, because you're always visible when and leaders are always leading, and people will always look to you for.
We're seeing a very
guidance.
public example of that, and perhaps we won't go into the service or the individual in this particular conversation, but we're seeing a very, very, very public example of values and culture and decisions at the top and organizational pressure being applied to one specific organization in the UK Fire and Rescue Service at the minute. I think across the leaders in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, and I include with that, CFA and NFCC and FBU and all of the actual, people reading operational services. I'm sure a lot of them will have varied opinions about how appropriate or inappropriate this is, how professional or unprofessional it is. The public voices seem to be that of adulation and acknowledgement for transparency and authenticity for the particular individual that we're speaking about. But yeah, it's a very, very public display of a very backroom conversation, isn't it, at the minute?
Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody is prepared to show out there and live out their values publicly, then your values are your values, and you can't be criticised for that. But yeah, absolutely.
Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection, and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial, and fire training professionals. Now, next up, and widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection. This is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. Now back to the show.
Manage energy, not just time. So it's
big one.
It's not just about how much time you put in, but how effectively you manage your energy. And somebody told me a great quote this week: don't fill your life full of days, fill your days full of life.
Yeah.
What a
we
great
don't want to live
saying.
longer, we want more experiences.
What a great saying. But it's that thing about where do you put your focus and how much do you value and protect your energy? It's really easy to throw all day long, 8, 9, 10 hour days into stuff, always on, always thinking you're going to, but how much time do we take to manage that, where we put our energy, where we put our focus, and actually recharging yourself, however you do that. Some people do it through engagement, conversation. Some people do it through locking themselves away, lying down in a dark room. But I think there's something about being a sustainable leader around managing your energy and your focus.
I'm very, 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 very cognizant and intentional about this now. And I think, again, the podcast became a manifestation of it. I want to have exciting, interesting, emotive development conversations for myself. I like spending my time speaking to interesting people. So I'm not going to have a very, high interaction conversations with some of the people that live locally around me, and I'm not going to have puddle jumping conversations with people that don't have an impact or an influence in my life, that aren't showing up with the same level of energy as me. And I think that can seem, and that can sound, even as I describe it now, very horrible, very very elitist, thinking that I'm better than somebody else. I'm not, but I really need to manage my energy, because it comes back to some people are just blame throwers. They just want to look for fault in the world all the time. They're the mood hoovers and the energy vampires. I had low energy when we came on this call this morning, and you didn't reach to the screen and ram caffeine down my throat, but you may as well have, because the way I felt from interacting with you for the first 5 or 10 minutes, so the radiator's not drains. Are you a radiator or are you a drain?
Yeah.
Be an energy multiplier when people engage with you. Does the room brighten as soon as you leave it? Those are the things you have to ask yourself.
But I think that that very often these people that do have an impact on an environment maybe don't even realise that. And again, it comes back to self-awareness, doesn't it? Embrace uncertainty. This is something that probably for me as a leader has been one of my biggest learning points and challenges, and something I've had to keep in check. We all like things to be certain. We all love certainty. We lining things up in a row. And I think this, certainly the higher up you get through an organisational structure, it's about navigating ambiguity. It's about making decisions without all the information, and being able to do so in a way that kind of inspires confidence in you, in what you're trying to achieve, regardless of how you might be feeling inside. And many people, I'm sure, listening to this may recognise that in terms of, how do we keep ourselves in check with that, managing uncertainty? How do you learn to deal with the volatile, uncertain, complicated environments that we work in? Ambiguity is the thing. Dilemmas. It's the your daily dilemma, your daily ambiguity, and dealing with that. There's only a procedure for so many things, and we've talked about operational discretion in the past. But arguably, some of the biggest, most impactful decisions that any leader in any organisation will make will be during their day-to-day managerial duties. So that sort of embracing uncertainty is something that I know certainly I've had to work hard on over the years, and I'm sure we'll all recognise that.
How do you balance with embracing uncertainty and falling in love with like catastrophe porn? And what I mean by that is like creating more uncertainty. I feel like I perpetually create uncertainty in my own life. And that can be exhausting for the people around you. Like everything is constantly in flux and flow and change in my world, and I speak about it on the podcast like it's a benefit at times, and it can be a benefit. Like there's a balance between being a healthy disruptor and actually are you just perpetually dissatisfied with various elements of your life, and then you're just constantly moving from one to another going, no, I don't like that, I'm going to smash it to pieces now and rebuild another one, and then load that cognitive weight onto the already various elements of uncertainty that's ongoing within my life. You don't want to be someone that's just attracted to change constantly. Maybe I don't know. Like I feel like I am.
I think everybody's different, and everybody.
It could be exhausting for the people around me.
Yeah, some people, being a disruptor, is some people. We need people. We need people. Every team, every organisation needs somebody that's prepared to go in and disrupt, but do so in a constructive way. But yeah, I think there's something about that. I think there's something about
because the podcast really is a healthy disruptor. If we had to try and give it a pitch, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like trying to be a contributing disruptor.
Yeah.
For the sector, I suppose.
Yeah. And a really great question would be to ask yourself now: how comfortable are you with uncertainty? And it's an uncomfortable question, but it's meant to be. The power of quiet influence. And you've just sort of mentioned this around that not all leaders are loud and visible. And I think this vision of leaders being a great man, great woman, the font of all knowledge, leading from the front, being the loudest voice in the room, I think that's a very outdated kind of view of leadership. But this is about subtle influence through relationships, credibility and quiet support, and knowing how to navigate the power structures in any sort of organisation. I saw a great presentation by who was then the Chief Fire Officer of Oxfordshire, Dave Etheridge, who I know very well, Dave, really well-regarded, well-respected leader in throughout the sector. And Dave gave us a presentation on power, influence and politics. And I probably won't do it justice, and Dave would know that. I've explained it better than I could, but it's something that stuck with me, and I've discussed this with Dave since, actually, about how the influence it had on me. And the basic thing around that influencing was, power, wield it carefully. You have power in an organisation, but in any given situation, you may not hold the power. So if you are negotiating with staff representatives, as an example, they hold the power. They hold the power to be able to say yes or no, and that could be a fundamental. You might have the organisational power to enact it, but you are negotiating in that environment, and in that environment, you may be able to just influence in certain environments. In certain, you may just be able to influence that. But the one that always stuck with me was the politics, and Dave's advice was don't get the politics wrong. You can get the power wrong, you can get the influence wrong, but don't get the politics wrong. I think that's particularly sort of apparent as you get sort of through an organisation structure. And I thought it sort of rung a bell or two with me. And that quiet influence, I think, is be careful how you use your power, be careful how you use your influence, and be very careful how you sort of use the politics thing.
The influence element is massive, isn't it? When we think about different ways in which we influence people, just expand for a little bit on that if you could, around, because people will think just of their position in services and how that influences other individuals, but that's kind of a one-dimensional approach to influence, isn't it? You're going to do something because I'm more important than you, or I'm higher than you, and I'm going to make you do it.
And influence is, I think one of the greatest skills you can learn as a leader is learning when others are trying to influence you.
Oh, okay.
We again, it sort of comes back to the leadership toolbox, and that quiet influence thing is around. It is incredibly useful to be able to develop a sense of when somebody is either trying to exert an agenda onto you or to influence you to come to a decision. And we all know, and it's kind of a human thing, isn't it, that when we believe passionately in something, or when we think something should be a certain way, very often that will become our thing. And I've worked with many people who've been very passionate about certain things, some of which, in the scheme of running a fire and rescue service, aren't massively pressing or important, but are really, really important to that person. And I suppose it's about how how those people choose to influence you, or how you can then influence them to perhaps help them channel it in another direction. But I think that power, influence, and politics thing is a really great way of kind of remembering some of your leadership responsibilities around, and influence is a huge thing in leadership.
Did you ever hear the Nimawashi, the Japanese business practice that involves gathering input and feedback from employees before making a formal decision and announcement? And it says there's a wonderful diagram if people look for the Nimawashi strategy. It was something I picked up in Six Sigma and Change and stuff like this, and it was about influence at a variety of levels. So Nimawashi is basically how, if we applied it to the template, it's when people do station visits, when they do chats with the chief, when they do all those sorts of things. It's identifying cultural architects within your service to get people on board, to introduce new ideas, to present changes, to solicit feedback, to reduce stress and confusion during times of change, and to build trust, increase communication. And it sort of starts those informal conversations, open, non-confrontational conversations with employees or people of influence at different levels to build that kind of consensus. But it's not really done formally. Some people think of these as like shadow meetings where, the chief sees the station manager from wherever and they just have a coffee in the lounge, or the FBU rep meets with the group manager from wherever just to have a little catch up, and they talk all about some of the challenges that are ongoing in their parts of the organization. I don't think it's something that people ever really do formally, but I remember when I came across it, Nimawashi was something that we were encouraged to consider when we would go into different areas of different factories and talk to leaders of certain lines, like if there was a fast-moving consumer goods line and there's someone that's worked there for 30 years, helping them feel heard and listened to, and before they see the next communication that's coming out in a month's time, and kind of making them feel valued and respected before they get this change imposed upon them. People just want to feel like they've been heard and considered. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drillbook. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading onto Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, notes and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters. So you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show.
Which absolutely leads on to the next one, Pete, which is recognition and reward. And it doesn't have to be the big annual awards ceremony, recognition type thing. I think the most powerful and arguably the most effective are those small acknowledgements that have an impact. Effort and progress, appreciation. I think that does a lot for an organisation's culture, and it's incredibly hard, to try and acknowledge everything that everybody does on a daily basis. But there's certainly within the sphere of people that you work with, as a leader, it's a very powerful thing. And I'm going to come back to that word connection, where you do recognise. And it's also nice to have things recognised. That along with two other colleagues, I delivered a presentation last week to the Eastern Hemisphere of an organisation that I'm working with. They're a global organisation, and we delivered a presentation. And a couple of days after, the CEO wrote us and wrote us a thank you for the presentation. And then it's a great thing. It's just a small thing, but it's a great thing. I think sometimes just that somebody's taken the time to acknowledge and something personal about their reflections in the email to say, that really builds a connection in terms of, and for me, I think it's a really powerful way of influencing your organisation's culture and actually setting the culture of reward and recognition and making sure that you reward the right things as well.
They always say what gets recognised and rewarded gets repeated. And also recognising, like you said, recognising how to recognise. Some people will like formal acknowledgement at some sort of reward ceremony. For members of your crew or your team, it will mean a lot more to them if they just have that quiet word and someone just says, I recognise what you did and how difficult that would be, or how difficult that would be for me. I did it again this morning with the girls at breakfast, and I said, I just wanted to say how impressed and just blown away I was by how confident you girls were, or what appeared like confidence to me, because it seemed like a really, really scary environment yesterday. We kind of decided to do this dance class last minute. I obviously wasn't going to do it.
Well, that was going to be my next question, Pete, was, did you?
Exactly. No, I didn't step in. I was trying to stop myself from, and again, this may be an excuse, but total transparency, I've done it a lot in the past and it's had the opposite effect. And my partner at the minute said, don't be a dance mom, because I have been guilty in the past of when, and I suppose you could zoom this out to teams, like you see a small amount of enthusiasm or a behavior that you want to see repeated, and you douse that small flame with a gallon of fuel and you accidentally put it out because you've wanted to accelerate it and reward it. And I know when I go into rooms I can sometimes be a big character and I can consciously or unconsciously draw attention to myself and perhaps detract from the situation for other people. So I didn't want to go in there and make it all about me. And be a big character in that room. And I also wanted to build that confidence for my daughter to go and do something by themselves. But yeah, I said to them at the breakfast table just how blown away I was and how impressed I was, and how scary it must have been. And I said something that we've repeated today, about people don't want to live longer, they want more experiences, and you girls going down there and having that experiences was massive. You can go to school next week and talk about what it was like, how the good, the bad, the ugly, but you've been there and you've done it. And I want to encourage that behaviour of leaning into things that scare you and realising that they won't kill you. And having that for our teams as well, even if something isn't an overwhelming success, acknowledging how difficult it would have been and how impressed you were and how it inspired you, because I closed, sort of in conversation with them saying, it inspired me to lean into some of the things that I'm kind of avoiding at the minute and things that I'm finding really difficult. And, to see you girls doing something like that on, 10 minutes notice, getting changed and,
Yeah.
oh God, I haven't got my perfect shoes with me and I wasn't ready to go
Brilliant
down
to
the
see,
bus
isn't it?
today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. No, brilliant. I thought you were going to say it inspired you to start dancing there, Pete, but,
Mate, I'd love to go on stage. Obviously not enough, otherwise I'd be doing it. But I would love to go on stage and do something like perform in a West End or something like that. There's a few roles that I really, really think I would enjoy. But we could probably.
I think the Rocky Horror Show is still running, Pete, this time.
Mate, there's a few.
Go on.
I could see myself in Oliver as what's his name? Oh bloody hell, the guy with the dog. He's going to escape me now.
Yeah, me too.
Can't remember his name, but and Les Miserables, Master of the House. There's a few different roles I like to do. But anyway, next.
Panto season's coming up. That's all I'll say. Right, you mentioned the team. Your team's success is your success.
Yeah,
I think that it's not just about your achievements as a leader. It's about how well you can empower your team to succeed. And I think there's a lot about creating the right conditions for your team to succeed. And arguably, that's your role as a leader. I know that the UK Armed Forces, particularly the Army in Sandhurst, teach servant leadership, and it's about removing any barriers, creating the conditions for greatness. And there's a lot to be said for that. And I think any team that is great, there's a great leader there. And probably the best teams that are great, you probably don't even notice the leader, because the leader is a cheerleader and should be there ideally be there for the teams. And I think, again, we've probably all worked with leaders who are very happy to claim the credit for the team's success and
take all the responsibility, give all of the credit, because you can go faster alone but further together, is what I always try and say.
There's some really great leaders out there that really create those sort of cultures where they are very open about the fact that their team's success is a reflection on the sum of their parts, and try and claim credit for that, which I thought was a really great point. And so the next one for me, and it's massively important for me, is leading with empathy and toughness, and balancing your kindness with firmness is crucial. And it's not just about being liked and respected. It's about making your decisions in the group and the organisation's best interest. And empathy and toughness is about boundaries. I know we've talked about boundaries before, but putting boundaries in, but understanding, leading with empathy is probably one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader. And it's a skill that takes some practice, but also being firm with people, groups, and putting boundaries in where boundaries need to be put in, so that people understand the rules and what they need to do when they come to work. And I think leading with empathy and toughness is probably one of the great shapers of any organisation or any group's culture.
Absolutely agree. I flip-flop between those regularly because I think I can be a little bit too tough at times. So yeah, I think the more experiences you have, the more you see things from different angles and can empathise and sympathise with the challenges that other people have faced, because they don't have the same characteristic blueprint that you do. So things that you might find easy have been a real heavy lift for them.
Yeah, and you've no idea what's going on in people's lives when they come to work. Not everybody shares their personal, and again, leading with empathy in the first instance, I think will always serve you well. Staying humble and curious. There's always more to learn, no matter where you are, and being open to new ideas. But here's a novel idea: admitting when you're wrong. I don't think there's anything that builds trust and connection, again, more than actually putting your hand up and saying, "No, I've got that completely wrong. Can we do that again? Can we have that conversation again?"
Yeah.
It's happened to me. I've said it to others, and I've never found that to backfire, because who can criticise you when you hold your hand up and say, "I got that wrong"?
Yeah, I always say you can't pickpocket a naked man, a naked person, and I will always be the first to admit my failures. Yeah, I've done it many, many times on this. And I always also say, we're all students, just with different levels of experience. If you can constantly embrace that student mindset, you're never the finished article, because everything's always changing. The only constant is change. So the eternal student will inherit the earth. The person that thinks they've mastered it will become insignificant, dated, and lose touch with reality, because we're never the finished article.
No. And the final one for me probably underpins everything is guard your integrity, and that's sort of the foundation in trust that we all have, and that psychological contract that we have with our teams, our organisations, ethics and values. If you just make any compromises on those, people see that, and people will that erodes trust and confidence in you as a leader more than anybody will ever know. And trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback.
I always say teams develop at the speed of trust. And it's something, integrity, we are constantly talking about at the podcast, because the partners that we align with, the guests that we have on, the way we show up on the podcast every day, the way that I communicate and act as an outward-facing visual representation of the podcast at times, we're in a very small sector, really, in the grand scheme of things. And we try and protect our values and our integrity for the longevity of what we're here to create and what we're trying to be as a productive contributor to the sector, because it can be so quick to damage that and you never get it back.
No, and that trust is sort of hard earned, easy lost. But yeah, I thought it was a really great kind of article. Sonia McDonald, CEO and founder, Leadership HQ, definitely worth a follow on LinkedIn.
I'm going to drop that link. I've grabbed it and I'm going to put it in underneath. I've just copied it into our working document for this episode. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to stick it under there for people to go and reference. I think that's a great point for us to close on, mate. Do you have anything else that we had down for discussion areas for today?
Something to try, WhatsApp voice notes.
Yes,
one of the things that we have discussed, and I think it would be really great to get feedback from the listeners. We do get feedback, really nice feedback, positive. But we want to hear it all, really. And one of the things that after this, by the time this goes out, we will have a WhatsApp number for people to send us WhatsApp messages, voice notes. And one of the things that we've talked about doing is just playing some of those during the next and just getting people's feedback on what we've said, good or bad, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
What this will look like practically to help people. So we've got a burner phone. Effectively, if we call it that, people know what that means. This is a phone number that is going to be accessed by myself and Carl. You don't have to say who you are. You don't have to say where you're from. You can do it if you want to. You can say, I'm Carl from X service, and here's my opinion and something I want to give on it. You can put it as a written piece of feedback. You can send it as a WhatsApp or an SMS, or you can voice note it, and we'll play it on the episode. If you want to voice note it and you say that you don't want your voice going out, we'll either try and edit the voice or we'll just use it as text. It'd be really nice to hear people's voices. And again, you haven't got to identify yourself. You can just put your voice out there and people will go, but they'll know who my voice is. Okay, well then just send a message. All we're looking for is trying to pull ourselves out of our own echo chamber. Now, yes, we speak to lots of different guests. Carl and Sarah do lots of work speaking with our partners and other organizations and people of influence in the sector, but there will still be a boundary to the edge of our own unconscious bias. And we want to rip ourselves out of that as much as possible. So if people have thoughts, suggestions, a question to ask of Carl or myself, or any
suggestions for topics, but we'd be more than happy to devote sections of this to a topic. What are the topics that people want to discuss?
You want to send a topic, you want to send a link, and you will say, I want to hear your guys' opinion on this. Okay, bounce it in. What is this not? This is not an opportunity for people to give us insights into some abhorrent behaviours that are going on in the UK Fire and Rescue Service.
There are mechanisms in place for that in every fire and rescue service.
We're not interested. We're interested in helping the whole sector move beyond that. But we're not judge, jury, and executioner. We're not the police. We're not the HMI. We're not anything like that. So please resist your temptation to send us anything. If you send us anything inappropriate, we're not going to report you, blah, blah, blah. We just block it. It's just not going to come to us again because it's nothing to do with us. So if you have interest in even challenging conversational topics, things that you want us to discuss, things that you think we've missed, opinions that we could include that perhaps we've just completely missed in terms of our conversations and topics. So yeah, by the time this comes out, if you look underneath this, there will be a little message that says contact the podcast here or something to that effect. And it'll be a phone number, and you can either leave a voicemail on it or your WhatsApp will always be the easiest because it's free for you to do if you're on Wi-Fi. We won't save your number. We won't put your name against a number. We will not use this phone number for any other form of communications in line with GDPR and all that sort of jazz. We won't save your number or hoard it or send you any spam. It's just to have an open dialogue with listeners of the podcast if they choose to.
And I think what's worth saying as well is that we welcome from every member of the emergency services, members of the public, anybody. Yeah. You don't have to be associated with. You can be an aspiring paramedic, police officer, firefighter, or a serving, or whatever. We love.
Maybe your son or daughter is thinking of joining, or maybe your husband or wife is thinking of joining, and you're like, I'm really worried about this. I've heard this. I don't know about that. I don't know how to ask the question because I don't want to seem stupid. But can you tell me about this?
Yeah,
go for it. Absolutely. No wrong answers, and we will never embarrass anybody on the podcast. That's not what we're here for. So
tell us what you think.
Awesome thing to close on, brother. We will have that phone number available for people underneath. As always, acknowledgements for yourself and for Sarah. Acknowledgement for Mark Seaton as well. Someone we've been leaning in and doing a lot more communication with. He's an informal friend, head of sort of MBM Publishing, runs a lot of the big firefighting magazines around the world, really. Been leaning in and helping us pull out of our internal biases as well, giving us some great exposure. So a lot of valuable people leaning in and helping us out at the minute, and we're very appreciative of that as we continue to ride this very strange journey to whatever destination it takes us to.
Who knows?
Beautiful. Thank you for your time together, my brother. I love you lots. Send my love to the family. And I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Cheers, Pete.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, and please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're around the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.